Hello, friends. Thanks for joining again. I am so grateful that we've made it to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday celebrated this weekend. And I want to especially give thanks today for the UNC Health Black Alliance Employee Resource Group for inviting me to deliver a keynote address to their members and staff this weekend. I am wanting to speak with you all a bit about some of the ideals of Dr. King and also think about how his wisdom and his legacy might relate to the ways that we think about wellness. Dr. King is quoted as saying, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhuman because it often results in physical death." And so some of us sometimes have heard it as inhumane. But the bigger point is that Dr. King really wanted us to have a land where health care equities were in place rather than inequities. And so many of us have had the experience of thinking about wellness in some very traditionally medical ways of thinking about it. So, within the medical field and specifically within behavioral health, when we think about mental illness, we're often thinking about certain categories of illness. We're thinking about the frequency, duration, and intensity of symptoms that someone may have, and the degree to which they meet a certain number of criteria indicates whether they will be diagnosed with a mental illness or not. And so, this is our predominant way of thinking about diagnosis and characterizing the challenges that someone may have. And while I do believe that there is some merit in this approach, I think it's important for all of us to be considering how can we actually measure wellness in a fuller way, in a holistic way. So, as many of you all know from my book, Blossoming Hope, I talk about different categories of being, that is, mind, body, soul, and spirit. And I talk about how those areas are integrated into who we are. And so much of the book was written primarily due to encounters that I've had with wonderful clients and clients who've taught me a lot about what it means to not just be a person who is defined or primarily identified by their illness, for example, the schizophrenic, but rather a person who comes first. The person comes first, and we use the language of a person with schizophrenia or a person with depression. Because there's so much more to life than just a mental illness or a diagnosis. But I want to talk about wellness today because we often have a level of confusion about whether we are well versus ill. And I have an image that I'd like to share with you. It is shared in the book, and it's called the Illness Wellness Continuum. On that continuum, you can see that as you move toward the left side of the continuum, that there are signs and symptoms of any given illness. And even though my focus, of course, is within behavioral or mental health, we also can use the same concept to think about our so called physical health as well. And so we have signs that may lead to symptoms. If we don't intervene with the symptoms, then they can convert to disability. And that might be a disability in terms of our having limited mobility, limited ability, and capacity. And ultimately, if untreated, that situation can lead to premature death. And so, toward the left end of the image, we tend to think of those points as defining illness. And they are illness. However, we tend to think that if we don't have any signs or a few signs, a couple of symptoms, but nothing beyond that, that we are actually well. And this is where I would like for us to reimagine more broadly what wellness actually is. I'd like for you to imagine that wellness is about being, first of all, aware of what is happening to you in your mind, body, soul, and spirit, that you're educating yourself about different types of challenges you may have, as well as different types of opportunities that come your way. So, as you increase in awareness and education, you grow and you are able to maximize your level of wellness. And this is when we know that we are striving or blossoming into wellness. So, if we are in the absence of illness symptoms, but don't necessarily have the growth that is indicated toward the wellness end of the continuum, then we can't really say that we're well, but that we're more at a neutral point. Regardless of where we fall on this continuum, we always want to be moving constantly toward the right end of the continuum. We want to be defining greater and greater wellness in ourselves. So many of you may have an opportunity during this MLK weekend to have an extra day off. If you remember the song about Dr. King and him being a drum major for justice, you remember that they say it's not a day off, it's a day to celebrate his birthday. And so during this time where you will hopefully take the opportunity, have the luxury of reflecting on his ideals, for example, thinking about the drum major instinct, the desire to be first, to be in charge, to lead, and to be significant, to be important. Those things, says King, are important, and we don't want to lose those instincts and those impulses. But he says that we do want to take the opportunity to be great and to maximize it by serving others. The one who is the greatest is the servant. And he says that everybody can be great because everybody can serve. So I'd like for you to remember that as you're celebrating this weekend. I also want you to think about some of the situations you've been in through 2020, 2021, now headed into 2022. And I would imagine that if you're like me, you have experienced some finite disappointments along the way. And sometimes those situations have felt even like more than disappointments. They have been painful situations and circumstances. They have been grievous to us. We have felt harmed or damaged or perhaps even traumatized by some of the things going on in this poly-pandemic. I assure you that you're not alone in feeling that. As Dr. King says, we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. So I hope that that will be an inspiration for you during this King holiday weekend. I'd like to leave you today with a short excerpt of a song from my first album, Choose Hope. And that song is about wellness, and we think about it often in a spiritual sense. But I encourage you to reflect today on wellness. And is it well, not only with your soul? Is it well with your spirit? Is it well with your mind? And is it well with your body? So consider those things as I share this song with you. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever thou hast taught me to say. for listening to the classic hymn, It Is Well. And I ask you today, not only is it well with your mind, spirit, body, and soul, but also, is it well in the sense that you intend in 2022 for it to be well? Those things that we have in our minds, we're instructed by our faith to call the things that are not as though they were. We don't want to say, for example, that we are fit when we are choosing to engage in behaviors that defeat our ability to be fit. Rather, what we are doing with our faith is envisioning what is possible, and then with spirit and grace and effort, being able to ever so slowly blossom into that reality. So that is my challenge for you this weekend. I hope you will enjoy a wonderful MLK weekend, that we will truly cherish once again this holiday the wonderful legacy that Dr. King has left for us. Remember that everybody can be great because everybody can serve. God bless.